على مدى
Over 4 months, I've communicated on daily calls with journalists and families and relatives in Gaza. And I've cooperated with 50 journalists for from more than 13 institutions. We have produced a series of investigations that we've called the Gaza Project. These investigations and reports have uncovered the targeting of Israel to journalists to the core of their work, and it's targeting to the mission of the reporters. I call here the head of or member of investigative journalism who has led this project and worked day and night, Huda Uthman, and her guests. So I call you here to the podium to hear more and listen more about the Gaza project. And it's actually the closest and the project to us. And for the coming years, it is the closest to my heart. Floor is yours. Thank you, Ibrahim.
Tens of thousands of Palestinians and more than 1,000 Israelis have been killed since October.
By this blackout, they're trying to stop the world from seeing what's happening in Gaza.
Where there is a strong potential for a war crime being committed, the live stream becomes critical evidence.
The Committee to Protect Journalists says it's the deadliest conflict for reporters, photographers, and camera operators since the group began tracking casualties in 1992.
Those who are still there, they've been injured, they've been detained, they lost family members, they've lost equipment, and they also fear reporting publicly.
It's a war also in the media, and we know it.
In this project, we try to expose some of the way the Israeli authorities are treating journalists both in Gaza and in the West Bank.
We are using techniques like geolocation, chronolocation, satellite imagery to find positions and narrow down the timeline of when specific hits happened.
We were able to achieve a very devastating account of what is happening in the Gaza Strip against journalists.
So many journalists have been killed trying to tell us what is happening over there. For the Gaza Project, we joined forces to make sure that there is no information blackout.
هذه السترة التي من المفترض أن تحمينا فهي الآن من تؤذينا هي من تؤذينا.
Thank you all for being here and for staying after the opening to attend our session. I'm going to start by introducing our speakers quickly, and just please note that Frederick Obermeyer was supposed to be with us, but he couldn't make it, and we wish him a speedy recovery. So I'll start with Laurent. Laurent Richard is the founder and director of Forbidden Stories, an investigative journalist and Emmy Award-winning documentary producer. And Manisha Ganguly is the investigations correspondent at The Guardian. She is the visual forensics lead, and she's a pioneer in using open source investigations, and something that I didn't know when I first met Manisha, and we worked together for months, is that she has the first PhD in open source investigations. And of course, you've already met Yumna Sayed. Yumna is an award-winning journalist, human rights advocate, and Al Jazeera English correspondent in the Gaza Strip. And as Farah mentioned, I am moderating the session, but I was also a participant in the Gaza project, so I'm moderating today, but I was also a part of the investigation. So I wanted to start with you, Laurent. I want to acknowledge first, it's been a heavy opening for a forum or a conference with the videos that we've seen, the pictures behind us, the words of our colleagues in Gaza, the words of Irene Khan. But I think it gives you an idea of the motivation of why we did the Gaza project, why we felt that we had to investigate the killing of the journalists there. And I wanted to start with you and maybe to give everyone an idea about our findings. And since Forbidden Stories, one thing that Irene Khan mentioned in her speech is that you can kill the journalist, but you can't kill the story. And this is actually Forbidden Stories' mission, and to talk to us also about this project in the context of all the other projects that you've worked on, how it compares.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Oda, and thank you, ARIJ, for making this conversation and this forum possible. It's so crucial. Having those kind of conversation and meetings is crucial. Basically, 1 year ago, we were here actually discussing about the inception of the Gaza project. And this is because we met here, because we discussed about that we discussed to start the Gaza project and then to build a coalition of news organizations with that mission, investigating how journalists in the Gaza Strip, but as well on the West Bank, were targeted by the IDF, and to investigate that using different kind of resources and skills. This is part of our mission at Forbidden Stories. As you were reminding, and as Iran Khan was reminding, our punchline, motto, mission, DNA is to believe that killing the journalist won't kill the story. We believe strongly in that because we believe that enemies of the free press are way more afraid and scary about having their own crimes exposed than having statements. So we believe that we should apply the Streisand effect to any stories that people would like to silence. We start our first investigation in 2017 after the killing of Daphne Caruana Galizia in Malta. We team up with 45 reporters from 18 news organizations from all across the globe to continue the work of Daphne, to investigate the killing of Daphne, and since then we have done more than 20 investigative projects. The Gaza project is one of the latest one. It was crucial, of course, to start it because for so many reasons that are obvious. First, as it was reminding, the numbers of killing of journalists in history. Secondly, the fact that it's impossible for any other journalist outside the Gaza Strip to investigate what is happening, including the war crimes over them. And as it was reminded by Iran Khan, journalists are civilians amongst other civilians. That means that journalists are survivors amongst other survivors over there. But the role of the journalist is to collect and document potential war crimes in the area where the conflict is happening. So if we don't have journalists, we have a lot to lose. All of us, any citizens, we are about to lose a lot of information. And if we are not reporting on that, war crimes will be multiplied with a full impunity. So it's just about doing journalism to make sure people get access to the information. So the Gaza project started 1 year ago. We published last June a first series of investigation, and about the methodology, we start with a list of the assassinated, of the killed, of the death of dead journalists, to investigate the condition they were killed, and to investigate if there was some kind of pattern. To give you, at that time, in June 25, the kind of finding we were having, it was that 40 journalists were killed while they were at home, 40 other journalists were killed and were believed to be affiliated with Hamas news organization. 18 of them were targeted by drones, which is a very important information because drones are supposed to be weapons to use with precision, to target with precision. So when you are a drone operator, you know who you are about to kill. And 14 of them, of those journalists being killed, have been killed while they were, or targeted, while they were wearing a press vest. That's another sign about what is happening over there, that the press vest is not protecting you as it's supposed to be, but is exposing you. So to collect that kind of information, we needed to be a group, to have your skills, and all the entire group to investigate and to hold the powerful accountable on that.
Thank you, Laurent. Manisha, how important was the use of open source intelligence techniques in this, given that no journalists are allowed in? None of us were able to be in Gaza to investigate this. And if you can talk us and give us some specific examples of how we used OSINT in the investigations.
Sure. Thanks, Hoda, and thanks, ARIJ, for organizing this panel. So Open source of visual investigations was key for a number of reasons. One is, as you mentioned, lack of ground access. Egypt and Israel continue to block access for foreign journalists to Gaza. The second, that Palestinian journalists are getting killed and targeted in record numbers. The ones that survive are continuing to report amid starvation and telecoms blackouts, because the entire telecoms infrastructure is also controlled by Israel. So most of the investigations that we did relied heavily on the use of satellite imagery, which allowed us a bird's eye view of what was happening on the ground in Gaza. That meant we were able to see the destruction, we were able to see the position of IDF tanks in relation to specific hits. And we were also using the usual open source techniques like chronolocation and geolocation to situate specific hits in space and time. And then on top of that, we were doing weapons analysis to attribute specific hits to the Israeli military, especially when we're operating in an environment where a lot of allegations are being made about Hamas attacking civilians. It was very important that we do the weapons investigation. And then finally, we were also relying on audio, because quite a few videos that we had, for example, one of the investigations that you worked on, Hoda, was on a hit on the AFP building, the Haji building in Gaza, which the IDF initially denied hitting. But after investigation of the CCTV footage that was captured by the camera that miraculously recorded the actual hit, we were able to actually catch the flash of the IDF tanks firing. We were able to see IDF positions located nearby, and then the audio analysis really nailed it. So we used 3 independent methods of inquiry. But the example that I think sort of starkly reflects the fate of journalists here is the case of Bilal Jadallah, who we saw earlier, who was the founder of Press House, a brilliant man. Press House was a sort of an oasis in this landscape. It was completely non-partisan and funded by the Swiss and Norwegian governments. Most of the light blue flak jackets that you see on that side were distributed by Press House. They set up an emergency press room right at the start of the war to help freelance journalists, to give them equipment and make sure they were kept safe. But what happened in the first month of the war in October was that these journalists were dying in record numbers. And by the middle of November, Bilal was convinced that Palestinian journalists in Gaza were being targeted. He had refused to leave up until that point, but when some of his favorite journalists, the ones he'd mentored, the ones that he stayed behind for, were killed, he had no choice but to leave. Now, you may have seen that the Israeli military has been dropping leaflets across Gaza asking people to move from north to south and saying that if you do not do so, you may be suspected of being a terrorist. The way to do so is there is a designated safe route called Salah al-Din Road. It's a highway that runs parallel to the coast. And there are designated safe hours that are broadcast by the Israeli military. So in a perfect scenario, in a conflict zone, the occupying force or the military power that is engaged in hostilities has to ensure safe passage of civilians under international humanitarian law. That is presumably what they should have done in this case. Bilal packed his bags on the day of his evacuation with his ID card and drove down the road. At some point down the road, his car was hit. We were able to get photographs of the car, and I spoke to 2 independent weapons experts, one ex-US military, one ex-British military, both of whom said that there is a very high likelihood that his car was in fact hit by an Israeli tank shell. So what we have here is a civilian, a journalist, trying to evacuate down a route that is marked safe, the route whose safety should be guaranteed by the Israeli military, and then that route is bombed by its own military, killing a journalist, a giant of journalism in Palestine.
Thank you, Manisha. Yumna, we were investigating from afar, but you were there. You were facing this yourself. The journalists whose killings we were investigating were your colleagues. What do you think of, like, a lot of the people we were speaking with there, like, they're telling, there's no question, we are being targeted. So when you see, like, investigations and efforts like this to investigate the targeting, what do you think of it?
First of all, thank you, Huda, for having me on this panel, and thanks to ARIJ for this amazing opportunity. I think and I believe that Israel has done everything it could. It has put all these measures and restrictions in order to prevent any kind of coverage from or to what is happening in the Gaza Strip. And it has succeeded in banning all international journalists, in preventing any outsources to come into Gaza to expose all these crimes. But the major problem was with the Palestinian journalists from inside Gaza. So it started by systematically targeting their offices, destroying their equipment, and even targeting the places in where they go to cover and report. And that was from the very beginning, from the very first days of the genocide. I was going to get killed in a targeting in the first massacre that happened in Jabalia refugee camp in the very first week of October, with a great number of other journalists, by the way. And that kept on going, that same scenario kept on going that way, but Palestinian journalists did not stop covering. So the targeting now was getting more precise and more deliberate, and the numbers of journalists that were being killed was getting higher and higher. And it wasn't just the journalists itself, their families and everyone else. They turned the Palestinian journalist to a life-threatening person to everyone around him. Now, for us as Palestinian journalists, we know that with everything that the Palestinian journalists, all that work that we are trying to do from inside Gaza, all this footage and material and ongoing reporting that hasn't stopped, the reporting that has come from the international journalism institutions around the world has been not even enough, barely enough, to the amount of material that is coming out of Gaza. And there is always the question with, is it credible? Is it trusted? Is it 100% true? While in other occasions would listen to something like a picture is worth 1,000 words. The Israeli propaganda and concept that every single Palestinian in Gaza is affiliated to Hamas, and that means that every single Palestinian in Gaza is a legitimate target, this same concept was the same concept that Western journalists around the world are actually dealing with. Because when they say, is the Palestinian journalist's story credible enough or not? When they come to the point where they say there are no journalists in Gaza and that's why we're unable to cover the story correctly or independently. There's no justification for that. There isn't any justification for that. The journalists in Gaza are working with no safety, with no security, with no guarantee to their lives. They're working in immense conditions and with very little food, very little water, no shelters, completely inhumane conditions and circumstances, leaving their families that are subjected to all these difficulties at home, and standing there for hours just to report for the outside world, the entire world, so that they can act accordingly and end this genocide. And yet, it's still ongoing, it's being underreported, and there is a lot of misinformation and disinformation. There is a lot of very ridiculous terminology used when describing and reporting the targeting of innocent Palestinian civilians in the Gaza Strip.
Thank you, Yumna. I'm going to actually go to Manisha because I want to touch on something. I think Manisha can speak about something that you mentioned. And we have 5 minutes, so Manisha, I'm going to ask you to do it in a minute. The Guardian published one of the stories that we worked on together, was called The Gray Zone. And it's specifically about the journalists who worked for Al-Aqsa, which is a Hamas-affiliated TV station. Can you tell us quickly about this?
Yeah, so one of the open questions of the war is Israel targeting journalists? Now, the Israeli military repeatedly told us that we do not have a policy of doing so. The largest casualties from any media outlet was Al-Aqsa, which is Hamas-affiliated. So we asked the IDF directly, how do you regard, what is the classification of Al-Aqsa? And they said, a spokesperson said, we see no difference between Hamas-aligned media and combatants of Hamas. We presented that to international humanitarian law experts, and they said that this is a willful misunderstanding of international humanitarian law because journalists have protection as civilians. What's interesting is we published the story with this headline, and about 5 to 6 hours later, the Israeli military put out a press release saying that their spokesperson misspoke to us on the record and that this does not characterize the Israeli military's targeting policy.
Thank you, Manisha. Laurent, since we published on June 25th, 30 journalists have been killed. So let's speak about impact. Israel has killed Palestinian journalists with a high level of impunity. CPJ in May of 2023 published a report called Deadly Pattern, and it's about 20 years of killing Palestinian journalists, and as Ms. Khan also pointed out in her speech, with absolutely no one, even the soldier who killed Shireen Abu Akleh, no one ever brought to justice or no consequences. So what did you expect as far as impact from our investigations, and were you disappointed?
Yes, of course, we are always a bit disappointed. When you are a journalist, you work so long to publish something, and at the end, you still think that that kind of stories might have a huge impact, or might, yeah, as you mentioned, there are more journalists being killed. So at least one thing that I think that we achieve a bit, and we have to be very cautious in saying that, it's like we try to rehumanize what is happening over there. And I think what is happening from the Israelis are blocking the access to other journalists. There is a disinformation war going on. There is harassment online against Palestinian journalists. There is propaganda labeling journalists as a terrorist. Everything is made by the Israeli authorities to organize a communication blackout on this area. And at the end, the kind of reporting we do have in France or in other countries is about, it's purely metrics. How many civilians have been killed? How many strikes today? How many buildings were destroyed? It's like the morning show of a deadly statistic. And there is no more human story behind. What we try to do with the Gaza project is continuing the work of the Keredin brothers, who were targeted by drones. And they were trying just to report on about the starvation in the north of Gaza. They were trying to interview some families. Samir Abu Daka was trying to report about the school and what was happening inside that school as well. So we try to re-immunize a little bit that. I think the second thing, we show as well that we were able to be united in this project. And the Gaza, what is happening in Gaza and in Israel is maybe one of the topics that is dividing most of the people on the planet. And I think it's so, we did, just by publishing this project with so many news organizations coming from different countries, with the Israeli-based organization as well, we did that all together and we achieved that, and we were able to ask questions to the IDF based on our findings. So that was another proof, if we needed one more, that collaborative journalism is useful to defeat impunity, at least to try it. So yes, I think we should continue, we should keep doing our work more than ever. We should keep that kind of resources also to keep the powerful accountable. One last example, we were able to prove with that project that the Israeli forces were lying about the targeting of the AFP building. They were saying that the AFP building was filming H24 what was happening in the Gaza Strip. And at some point, like all the TV station, the camera on the balcony was hit. And we were able to find, thanks to the footage and to investigate, thanks to OSINT, we were able to prove and to find the geolocation and the place where the Israeli tank was situated. But unfortunately, we asked Maxar, the satellite picture company, to provide us precisely that picture of that very precise morning where the shoot was happening. And Maxar, who is an American-based company, refused to deliver it. But we know they do have that picture. They are still refusing to give access to that to 50 journalists, and that's a shame.
Thank you for mentioning this, Laurent, because it's a very important point in our investigation. And I know our time is up, but I will give Yumna the last word. I think it's only appropriate, Yumna, as the Palestinian journalist from Gaza who's on this stage.
Thank you. There are no words to actually describe the ongoing situation for the entire population of Gaza, the journalists, the civilians, the children, the ongoing slaughter every single day, and the devastation that is just growing, ongoing every single day, getting worse every day, worse than the day before. People in Gaza, when you speak to them, sometimes I just feel that I've lost any kind of words to say, anything that I can make my colleagues feel better or give them hope or lift them up, because it is just constant frustration and devastation while the entire world is still watching this ongoing genocide. The best and most documented genocide that history has ever witnessed before. And unfortunately, because of all the ongoing complicity, this is still happening, and it's still being allowed to happen. Again, I've said this before, and I continue to say this. This is a battle for humanity, and every single person who calls himself a human being needs to fight this fight, because it's a fight for the ongoing of our humanity. You're saving the humanity by calling for the end of this genocide and for the justice to the Palestinian people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yumna. I would like to thank our speakers, and thank you to everyone who's here. I hope you enjoy the rest of your days in the forum. Thank you.
Thank you.